A lonely widow buys a haunted Mafia mansion for $100, hoping for a quiet place to spend her final years. But when she begins to explore the abandoned halls, she discovers something hidden deep within the walls, something the previous owner desperately tried to protect. What she uncovers inside this haunted Mafia mansion isn't just a secret, it's a truth powerful enough to change lives forever. Subscribe for more powerful stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The rain had just stopped when Edith Ravenscroft stepped out of the cab, her gloved hand trembling slightly as she reached for the iron gate. The driver didn't wait for a tip, just a quick glance at the house, and he was gone. That was the way people behaved around this place. Like it could see them. In the pocket of her long, worn coat was a folded document. The ink had begun to fade, but the words were still clear enough. A deed. A mansion for $100. They had laughed when she signed it, a woman her age, alone in the world, buying a house no one else would even step inside. They whispered about the past, about the men who built their fortunes in blood, about the nights when shadows moved behind broken windows. And always, that name Salvatore De Luca spoken low, like a prayer you didn't quite believe in. But Edith had already buried the only man who ever made her feel safe. Since then, silence had become her closest companion. The gate groaned open beneath her hand, and there it stood. The mansion. Tall, hollow, waiting. Edith lifted her chin, though her breath wavered in the cold air. "Well," she whispered softly, "I suppose we both have ghosts." And deep inside the house, something seemed to listen. The first night in the mansion did not arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, like a memory no one wanted to remember. Edith Ravenscroft sat alone in what must have once been the grand sitting room, her small suitcase resting unopened by her feet. The last of the daylight clung weakly to the tall windows, stretching long shadows across the cracked marble floor. Dust hung in the air, glowing faintly like drifting ash. She hadn't lit a fire yet. Somehow, it felt too soon. Instead, she sat in silence, listening. At first, there was nothing. Just the wind brushing against the walls and the faint ticking of something unseen deep within the house. Then, a sound. Soft. Deliberate. A footstep. Edith didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair, the leather creaking beneath her grip. Another step. Not close, not near the room. Above her. She lifted her eyes slowly toward the ceiling, where faint cracks stretched like veins across the plaster. The house was old, she told herself. Wood shifts, pipes settle. But this had rhythm. A pause. Then two steps, closer together this time, as if someone was walking. Edith exhaled, long and slow, steadying the tremor in her chest. "I suppose," she murmured into the empty room, her voice softer than she intended. "You've had the place to yourself for a long time." Silence answered her, but it was no longer empty. That night, she made her bed on the floor of a small library she had found near the back of the house. The shelves were lined with books long since forgotten, their spines faded, their pages curled with age. There was something comforting about them, something human. She fell asleep quickly, too quickly, and she dreamed. Not the usual dreams of her late husband, the ones that came and went like fading echoes. No, this was different. She stood in the same house, but it was alive. Light spilled from chandeliers above. Music drifted through the halls, soft and elegant. Voices laughed somewhere beyond the walls. And then she saw him. A man, tall, dressed in a dark suit that belonged to another time. His face was turned away, but there was something heavy in the way he stood, like a man carrying more than he could bear. He turned slowly, and before she could see his face, she woke, gasping. The room was dark again, cold, silent, but not empty. Edith sat up, her breath visible in the chilled air. Something felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not yet. But watching. She reached for the small lamp beside her and turned it on. The soft glow pushed back the shadows just enough to reveal the room again. And that's when she saw it. On the dusty wooden floor, just beyond the edge of the light. Footprints. Small, bare Fresh? They hadn't been there before. Edith stared at them, her mind refusing to settle on a single explanation. The windows were sealed, the doors locked. And yet, the prints led from the doorway to the center of the room and stopped, as if whoever had made them simply disappeared. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, carefully, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. Her joints ached, her breath trembled. But her eyes remained steady. She stepped forward, placing her foot beside one of the prints. It was smaller than hers, much smaller. A child's, perhaps. A strange ache tightened in her chest. Not fear. Something else. Something older, lonelier. She knelt down, her fingers hovering just above the imprint, as if touching it might break whatever fragile truth held it there. "Were you left behind too?" she whispered. The house answered. A door slammed somewhere deep in the corridor. Edith flinched, the sound echoing through the walls like a gunshot. Then came the wind, rushing suddenly through the halls, though no window had been opened. The lamp flickered violently, shadows stretching and twisting across the walls like reaching hands. And then, silence. Again. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. As though something had been stirred and would not settle back so easily. Edith remained there on the floor for a long time, staring at the footprints as the light steadied once more. She could leave. She knew that. Call someone, sell the place, walk away like everyone else had. But as she slowly rose to her feet, her gaze drifting toward the dark doorway beyond the room, she realized something with quiet certainty. This house wasn't trying to scare her away. It was trying to show her something. And for the first time since she had arrived, Edith Ravenscroft felt it, not fear, but purpose. A fragile, dangerous beginning of something waiting to be uncovered. The house did not reveal its secrets all at once. It waited, as if measuring Edith Ravenscroft, deciding whether she was worthy of what lay buried beneath its silence. Days passed. The strange sounds continued, soft footsteps in empty corridors, doors creaking open where she was certain she had closed them, and once the faint echo of piano keys being pressed in the dead of night. But Edith did not run. Instead, she listened, and slowly the house began to answer. It started with something small. A draft. Cold air brushing against her ankles as she stood in the upstairs hallway one gray morning. The windows were sealed tight, yet the chill persisted steady, unnatural. She followed it, step by step, until she reached the far end of the corridor, where an old oak cabinet stood pressed tightly against the wall. It didn't belong there. Not truly. Something about it felt forced, as if it had been placed not to furnish the room, but to hide it. Edith rested her hand against the wood. It was colder than the air around it. For a long moment, she simply stood there, her breath slow, her thoughts quiet. Then, with a strength that surprised even her, she pushed. The cabinet resisted at first, groaning against the floor as though unwilling to move, but inch by inch it gave way, revealing something behind it. Brick. Rough, uneven, and wrong. The rest of the wall was smooth plaster, aged but intact. This section had been sealed deliberately, hastily. Edith's heart began to beat faster, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. She had seen this before. Not here, but in life. People didn't seal walls unless they were trying to forget what was behind them, or hide what they feared might be found. She fetched a small hammer from her bag, an old thing, worn from years of use. For a moment, she hesitated. The house seemed to hold its breath with her. Then, she struck. The sound echoed sharply through the corridor. Again, and again. The brick began to crack, fragments falling away to reveal darkness behind it, a hollow space. Hidden, waiting. Dust filled the air as she worked, her hands trembling not from weakness, but from the weight of what she might uncover. Finally, a section gave way, enough for her to reach inside. Her fingers brushed against something cold, metal. She pulled it free slowly, coughing as years of dust rose around her. It was a box. Heavy, iron, sealed with a rusted latch that had not been touched in decades. Edith stared at it for a long time. This was it, the thing the house had been guiding her toward. Not fear, not madness, truth. That night, she brought the box down to the kitchen. The single overhead light flickered faintly, casting long shadows across the table as she set it down. Her hands rested on the lid. For a moment, she closed her eyes. "Let's see," she whispered softly, "what you couldn't take with you." The latch broke with a dull crack. The hinges groaned, and slowly, the box opened. Edith leaned closer, expecting gold or weapons, or something terrible enough to justify the house's reputation. But what she found instead made her breath catch. Papers. Dozens of them, bound together with a faded leather strap. Photographs, too black and white, edges curled with age. She picked one up carefully. A man stood in a garden, sunlight caught mid-laughter on his face. A woman beside him, her hand resting gently in his. 2 children played at their feet. A family. Not monsters. Not shadows. Just people. Edith turned the photograph over. A name was written in delicate ink. Salvatore De Luca. Her fingers trembled. She reached for the bundle of papers, untying the strap with slow, deliberate care. Inside, letters, records, and at the very bottom, a notebook. The first page was worn, the ink slightly faded but still legible. She leaned closer, her lips moving silently as she read the opening line. "For those who will never know the truth." The words pulled her in, deeper. Page after page unfolded a story the world had never been told. Not of power, not of crime, but of regret. Of a man trapped in a life he could no longer bear, trying, desperately, to make something right before it was too late. Edith's breath grew shallow as she turned the pages faster. There were records of money, vast amounts moved quietly, carefully, not for wealth, but for something else. A name appeared again and again. A home for children. Her hands stilled. Her eyes widened. The silence in the room deepened. The feared Mafia king had been building something good, something no one had ever seen. Edith sat back slowly, the weight of it settling into her bones. The house wasn't hiding darkness. It was hiding a truth the world had buried. And suddenly, everything made sense. The footsteps, the dreams, the feeling of being watched. This place hadn't been trying to scare her. It had been waiting. Waiting for someone to listen. Edith looked down at the notebook in her hands, her voice barely more than a breath. "You didn't get to finish it, did you?" The house remained silent. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt hopeful. That night, Edith Ravenscroft did not sleep. The fire in the small kitchen hearth had long since burned low, its glow fading into soft embers. Yet she remained there, seated at the wooden table, the notebook open before her, as though closing it might somehow erase what she had just learned. Outside, the wind moved gently against the walls. Inside, the house listened. She turned another page, slowly, carefully. Each word felt heavier than the last. There were no grand confessions, no dramatic declarations, just fragments. A man writing in the quiet hours of the night, trying to make sense of a life he could no longer justify. "I built everything on fear," one line read, "and now I see that fear leaves nothing behind worth keeping." Edith's fingers lingered over the ink. For years, she had believed in something simple, something clean, that people were either good or they were not. It had been easier that way. Easier to accept the world after her husband passed, easier to believe that loss was random, that suffering had no deeper meaning. But this was something else entirely. Salvatore De Luca. The name people whispered like a curse had not been just a monster. He had been a man who knew he had done terrible things, and had tried, in the end, to leave behind something that wasn't broken. Edith leaned back slowly, her eyes drifting from the notebook to the dark corners of the room. "How many times," she murmured softly, "have we buried the truth because it didn't fit the story?" The house did not answer, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt understanding. Her gaze moved to the photographs again. The same man, the same face, but now she saw something she hadn't noticed before. Not power, not menace. Weariness, a quiet sadness behind the smile. She thought of her husband then, of the man he had been, strong, kind, patient, and of the moments near the end when illness had taken more from him than she had ever thought possible. He had changed too, not into someone worse, but into someone carrying a weight no one else could see. And suddenly, the line between good and bad didn't seem so clear anymore. Edith closed her eyes briefly, the memory settling deep in her chest. Maybe, she whispered, we're all just trying to make it right before the end. The thought stayed with her. In the days that followed, she began to see the house differently. The creaking floors were no longer warnings. They were echoes. The shadows in the corners weren't threats. They were remnants. And the footsteps she heard at night, soft, distant, no longer made her heart race. They made her listen. Because now, she understood, this place wasn't haunted by evil. It was haunted by unfinished intentions, by a story that had been cut short, and a promise that had never been fulfilled. One afternoon, as pale sunlight filtered through the tall windows, Edith returned to the hidden space behind the wall. The broken bricks still lay scattered where she had left them. Dust clung to the edges like time refusing to move on. She knelt slowly, her joints protesting, and reached inside once more, not for the box this time, but for something else. Understanding. Her fingers traced the rough edges of the opening. This is where you hid it, she said softly, as though speaking to someone just beyond her sight. Not because you were afraid it would be stolen. Her voice faltered slightly. But because you were afraid no one would believe it. The words hung in the air. Heavy. True. Edith sat there for a long moment, the quiet pressing gently around her. Then, slowly, something shifted inside her. Not fear, not doubt, but decision. She could walk away. Leave the house, sell it, let the past remain buried where the world had already decided it belonged. It would be easier, safer. But as she looked around the dim hallway, at the walls that had held this secret for decades, she realized something with a clarity that settled deep in her bones. If she walked away now, then the truth would die here. Again. And whatever good that man had tried to leave behind would vanish with it. Edith rose slowly to her feet, her hand resting against the wall for balance. Her reflection caught faintly in a nearby mirror older than she remembered. Thinner, but her eyes were different. Steadier, stronger. She turned back toward the corridor, her voice quiet, but certain. No, she said. I don't think you were meant to be forgotten. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard creaked. Soft, almost like a response. And for the first time since she had arrived, Edith Ravenscroft no longer felt like a visitor. She felt like a part of the story. Morning came quietly. Not with light, but with clarity. Edith Ravenscroft stood by the tall kitchen window, the notebook still open in her hands. Outside, the sky stretched pale and empty, the kind of gray that made everything feel unfinished, much like the life described in those pages. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. She felt awake, truly awake for the first time in years. Her fingers traced a line in the notebook again, one she had read so many times it no longer felt like someone else's words. If I cannot undo what I have done, then let me build something that outlives it. Edith closed the book slowly. Outlives it. The words lingered in her chest, heavy, but not painful. For years, she had believed that once something was broken, it stayed that way. That loss was permanent. That time only taught you how to live around the emptiness. But this house, this story, was telling her something different. That even after everything, something new could still be built. She turned from the window, her gaze drifting across the dim kitchen. Dust still clung to every surface. The walls were cracked. The air carried that faint scent of age and abandonment. It was not a home. Not yet. But for the first time, she didn't see ruin. She saw possibility. That same afternoon, Edith did something she hadn't done since arriving. She opened the front doors. wide. The hinges groaned in protest, the sound echoing across the empty grounds. Cold air rushed inside, stirring the dust, carrying with it the distant sounds of the outside world, cars passing, faint voices, life continuing beyond these walls. She stood there for a long moment, her hand resting on the doorframe, letting the house breathe. "Enough hiding," she said softly. Her voice didn't tremble this time. "We're not doing that anymore." The decision came not as a burst of courage, but as something quieter, stronger. Certain, she would finish what Salvatore De Luca had started. Not for him, not even for the truth, but for the ones who were never given a chance. Children, alone, forgotten, just as this house had been. The thought settled into her bones like something meant to be there all along. Over the next few days, Edith began to move through the mansion differently. Not as a guest, not as someone passing through, but as someone who belonged. She opened windows that hadn't been touched in decades, letting in light that revealed the true shape of the rooms. She cleared away broken furniture, one piece at a time, her body aching but her spirit steady. In the grand hall, she stopped often looking up at the faded ceiling, imagining what it once had been, what it could be again. The house responded subtly. The footsteps in the night became softer, less restless. The doors no longer slammed, and just once, she thought she heard something that made her pause completely. Laughter. Faint. Distant, but warm. She didn't question it. She simply smiled. By the end of the week, she made her first call. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the phone, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to begin. The number belonged to a local records office. At first, the man on the other end sounded uninterested. Another story, another rumor, another old house with secrets. But when Edith began to really speak about what she had found, about the documents, the trust, the intent buried beneath decades of silence, the tone changed. Curiosity replaced dismissal, then caution, then something else. "Ma'am," the man said slowly, "if what you're saying is real, you may be sitting on something very significant." Edith closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "It is real," she said. There was a pause, longer this time. "Then you should be careful," he replied quietly. "Things like that, they don't stay buried by accident." The line went silent for a moment after the call ended. Edith stood there, the receiver still in her hand. The warning lingered, but it didn't shake her. If anything, it confirmed what she already knew. This wouldn't be easy. There would be resistance, doubt, maybe even danger. But for the first time in a long, long while, she wasn't afraid of what might come next. Because now, she had something she hadn't felt since the day she lost everything. A reason to move forward. She turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the quiet house. "This was your chance," she whispered into the stillness. "Now it's mine." Somewhere above her, a floorboard creaked. Soft, steady, almost like approval. Change did not come gently. It never does. At first, it was small things. Edith Ravenscroft waking earlier each morning, her steps steadier, her voice firmer when she spoke on the phone, her hands no longer trembling when she signed documents or asked questions that made others uncomfortable. People in town began to notice. The old woman who had once been the subject of quiet laughter was no longer invisible, but attention brings shadows with it. The first sign came on a cold evening. Edith had just returned from the city archives, her coat dusted with snow, her mind still turning over the records she had managed to uncover proof that the trust mentioned in Salvatore's notebook had once existed and had been abruptly frozen after his disappearance. She pushed open the front door and froze. The house felt wrong, not like before, not watchful, not waiting, disturbed. The air was colder, sharper. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning the grand hall. Nothing seemed out of place until she saw the mantel. The notebook was gone. For a moment, her heart simply stopped. Then it began to pound hard, uneven, echoing in her ears. "No," she whispered, moving forward. Her steps quickened despite the ache in her joints. The photographs were still there, the small items she had arranged untouched, but the notebook, the one thing that mattered most, gone. A sound came from behind her. The faint scrape of gravel outside. Edith turned sharply and moved toward the window. A car? Dark, parked just beyond the gate. Its engine was still running, and in the dim light, a figure sat inside, watching. For a split second, fear surged through her chest, cold, sharp, undeniable. But it didn't stay, because something stronger rose to meet it. Resolve. Edith stepped away from the window slowly. Whoever had taken the notebook, they knew what it was, which meant one thing. The truth was real, and someone didn't want it uncovered. That night, the house felt different again. The quiet was heavier, not peaceful. Protective, as if the walls themselves had closed in, guarding what remained. Edith sat in the library, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They took it, she said softly into the empty room. Her voice didn't break. They took his voice. The silence that followed was deep. And then, a sound. Not from outside. Not from above. From within the house itself. A low, hollow knock. Edith lifted her head slowly. Again? Knock. Knock. From the far wall. The same wall where she had first found the hidden box. Her breath caught. She stood, moving toward it carefully, her fingers brushing against the cold surface. The sound came again. Clearer now! From behind. There's more, she whispered. Her pulse quickened, not with fear this time, but something almost electric. Hope. With effort, she began to pull away the remaining bricks, her hands working faster than they had any right to at her age. Dust filled the air again, the sound of crumbling mortar echoing through the corridor. And then, another cavity, smaller, hidden deeper within the wall. Inside, another object, not a box this time, a sealed envelope, wrapped in cloth, untouched. Edith's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were documents different from the first set, more official. Stamped, signed. And at the top, a name she hadn't seen before. Not Salvatore De Luca, but someone else? A partner, a witness, someone who had helped create the trust, and possibly someone who had betrayed him. Edith's breath grew shallow as she read. There were notes, names, locations, and one line, underlined heavily in ink. If anything happens to me, they will try to erase this. Do not trust the council. Her hands slowly lowered. The room seemed to tilt slightly beneath her. This wasn't just a forgotten story. This was something that had been deliberately buried, protected, hidden. And now, threatened again. The car outside was gone by morning, but the message remained. She was no longer alone in this, not in the quiet, comforting way the house had once made her feel, but in a far more dangerous sense. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting for her to stop. Edith stood in the grand hall, the new documents clutched tightly in her hands. Her reflection stared back at her from the cracked mirror across the room. Older, tired, but unbroken. They think I'll quit, she said softly. Her voice echoed faintly through the house. They think I'm just an old woman who wandered into something she doesn't understand. She paused. A faint smile touched her lips. They're wrong. Somewhere above, a floorboard creaked again. Not warning, not fear, but something else. Something steady, as if the house itself had chosen her, not just to uncover the truth, but to protect it. And for the first time, Edith Ravenscroft understood something clearly. This was no longer about redemption, not just his, but hers, because in fighting for a man the world had already condemned, she had found something she thought she lost forever. Strength, purpose, and a reason to keep going. Spring did not arrive suddenly that year. It came the way healing does. Quietly, almost unnoticed at first. A patch of green beneath the melting snow, a bird returning to a branch long forgotten, a window opened and left open. Inside the mansion, the air had changed. No longer heavy with secrets. but filled with something softer, something alive. Edith Ravenscroft stood in the grand hall, her hand resting lightly against the polished banister that workers had only recently restored. The same staircase that once disappeared into darkness now carried light from the tall windows above, spilling across the floor in warm, golden lines. It had taken months, months of resistance, of letters sent and ignored, of officials who dismissed her, of quiet threats that came in the night calls with no voice, footsteps outside the gate, shadows that lingered just a moment too long. But she had not stopped. She could not, because the truth, once uncovered, has a way of refusing to be buried again. The documents she had found, both the stolen ones and the hidden copies, had been enough. Enough to reopen the case. Enough to force the city to look again at a man they had long ago decided to forget. Salvatore De Luca was no longer just a name whispered in fear. He was something more complicated, something human, and because of that, the trust he had created was restored. Not fully at first, but enough. Enough to begin. Edith stepped slowly through the hall, her shoes soft against the floor. Voices echoed from the far rooms now. Not ghosts, not memories. Children. Real, living, laughing. She paused at the doorway of what had once been a cold, empty library. Now it was filled with light. Shelves repaired, books returned, a piano near the window, its keys worn but alive again beneath small, uncertain fingers. A little girl sat there, pressing one note at a time, her brow furrowed in concentration. Edith watched her quietly. For a moment, time folded, and she saw it. Not the broken house she had first entered, but the one that had existed long before. A father standing in the doorway, listening, hoping. The vision passed, but the feeling remained. Edith smiled faintly. "We're getting there," she whispered. The transformation did not stop at the walls. Outside, the town had changed too. The same people who once laughed now came with tools in their hands. With paint, with wood, with quiet apologies they didn't always know how to say out loud. A man whose father had once worked for De Luca helped rebuild the garden wall. A teacher volunteered to give lessons twice a week. Even the old woman from down the street who had once warned Edith to stay away brought fresh bread every Sunday morning. The mansion no longer stood alone. It belonged to something larger. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Edith stood outside by the iron gates. They no longer creaked the way they once had. They opened easily now, freely. Behind her, the sound of children playing drifted across the courtyard, mingling with the soft trickle of water from the restored fountain. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it all settle. The journey, the fear, the doubt, the long nights when she had nearly given up, and the quiet voice inside her that had refused to let her walk away. "You didn't fail," she murmured softly. Whether she was speaking to him or to herself, she wasn't entirely sure anymore. The wind moved gently through the trees, brushing against the ivy-covered walls like a whisper, and for a brief, fleeting moment, she felt it. Not a presence, not something seen, but something understood. As if somewhere beyond the reach of time and regret, a man who had once believed he would be remembered only for his sins was finally at peace. That night, Edith sat alone in the great hall. The house was quiet again, but not empty, never empty. The fire burned low in the hearth, casting soft light across the walls where shadows once clung. On the mantel rested three things: the notebook, a silver cross she had found among the documents, and a small photograph taken just days before. A group of children standing in front of the mansion, smiling, alive, home. Edith reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the frame. Her hands were thinner now, weaker. Time had not stopped for her, only changed direction. She leaned back in her chair slowly, her eyes drifting toward the tall windows where the night sky stretched wide and endless beyond the glass. For the first time in years, she felt no weight pressing on her chest, no emptiness, no silence that needed to be filled, only peace. A quiet, steady kind of peace. The kind that comes when something broken has finally been made whole. Her voice, when she spoke, was barely more than a breath. It's done. The fire crackled softly in response, and somewhere, deep within the house, a floorboard creaked. Gentle, familiar, like an old friend settling in for the night. Outside, the fountain continued to whisper under the stars. Inside, the house stood warm and full of life. No longer a place of fear, no longer a monument to the past, but something else entirely, a beginning. And though Edith Ravenscroft would not remain there forever, the light she had uncovered, the one buried beneath years of silence and misunderstanding, would, because some stories do not end when a life does, they live on, in every life they touch. Some houses aren't haunted by ghosts, they're haunted by unfinished stories. Edith Ravenscroft didn't just restore a mansion, she proved that no one is only the worst thing they've done. Salvatore De Luca couldn't erase his past, but he tried to leave something good behind. And because Edith chose to believe in that a place once feared became a home filled with life. Sometimes, redemption comes too late for one person, but it can still change the lives of many others. You don't have to fix the past. You just have to build something better from it. One choice, one act of courage, one step forward. That's enough to change everything. Do you believe people can truly change? Like and subscribe if you believe in second chances.